Now, I know I've been talking about the Walking Dead show on my channel for quite a while, and for today's video I wanted to do something different and something new. So I will be talking about the top 5 differences between the comics and the Walking Dead main show, so stay tuned. And now, before we actually get into the video, I'd like to ask you all to like, share, and subscribe. And thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you guys so much for the growth. It's actually crazy seeing, the change that this channel had in the last 2 months. So again, this growth is all because of you guys, and I really appreciate it. And we have a goal in mind for 5,000 subscribers. So if you guys want to be part of this journey to 5,000 subscribers, please like, share, and subscribe. And yeah, enjoy the video. And now, before we actually get into the list, I want to point out that this is not in any particular order, right? These are just 5 things that I want to talk about that are different in the comics than the TV show. And now, the first difference I actually want to talk about is that Daryl and Merle are not in the comics. And this is very well known, right? And the reason why I'm even pointing it out, right? It's because Daryl is such an important character for the show, right? I mean, he was supposed to die in season 1 of The Walking Dead, but he just became such a huge character, and then he ended up becoming the main character of The Walking Dead after Rick left. And when I was actually comparing the comics to the TV show, I actually noticed that Daryl actually took the role of Tyrese, Abraham, and Carl. And Carl I'll be talking about later on, because again, there's a huge change for Carl's character as well. But if you compare The Walking Dead, up till season 5 or season 6, right? Daryl takes that role of Tyrese in the comics and also Abraham in the comics, because again, when you see the moment where Rick actually bites off Joe's throat in the show, Daryl and Michonne are actually with Rick in that moment. But in the comics, it's actually Abraham, Carl, and Rick that are there. And now, that's just one thing I wanted to point out, right? Because it does seem like that because of Daryl's popularity in the show, right? They actually strayed away more from the comics. And, that's perfectly okay, right? Because Daryl is an amazing character, right? And I'm actually happy that they actually gave him that role of quote unquote Rick's brother, right? In the comics, it was more like Abraham and Tyrese, right? But, they actually gave that whole role to Daryl, even though in the comics Abraham and Tyrese weren't as close to Rick, but a lot of moments that these characters had, it was actually given to Daryl in the show. Now, the second point I actually want to talk about is Judith/Lori's death. And first, let's get into Judith. This is because in the show, Judith actually lives on, right? And she becomes a really big character, but in the comics, she actually dies in the prison when she's still an infant. And how this happens is that when Lori is actually carrying Judith, when the governor invades the prison, one of the governor's people actually do shoot Lori in the back. She falls down on Judith, and also Judith dies in the process. And also, Lori's death is very different from the show as well, because in the show, Lori, she actually dies while giving birth to Judith, right? When Carl and Maggie are with her. But in the comics, she successfully gives birth to Judith in the prison. But then, when the governor actually invades, that's where she dies. And, she actually, of course, she gets shot in the back, killing both her and Judith in the process. And now, in my opinion, this is one of the most dark moments from the Walking Dead comics. And the comics are insanely dark compared to the show, right? There are a lot of aspects that are very similar to the show. Some parts are even panel for panel. But I think we could all agree that the Walking Dead comics are a bit more dark than the show, right? It just depends on your interpretation of it and your point of view. But, if they actually went with the storyline of Judith dying as an infant, that way, in the crossfire of, the governor invading the prison, that would have been insanely dark. And I think even I heard that they wanted to do that storyline. They actually wanted to kill off Judith, but they ended up not doing that. And, in my opinion, that was actually a good decision on their part, because, The Walking Dead is a really dark show in general. And, just having that moment would have just, stuck with a lot of viewers in a bad way. And now, the third moment I actually want to talk about that is in the comics, that is not in the show, is Rick Grimes getting his hand cut off by the governor. And, I do have a video on my channel that actually explains this and, discusses this, right? And, potentially, Rick could get his hand cut off in The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live. But in the comic books, they went with the story where Rick Grimes, when he actually makes to Woodbury, right, he actually gets his hand cut off by the governor, and this is like their first interaction ever, right? I mean, the governor seems like a nice guy to Rick, and then, you know, he just goes and cuts off his hand. It's very unexpected, and, you know, it's definitely huge, right? Because in the comics of The Walking Dead, Rick Grimes doesn't have a hand, right? And, you know, again, the prison arc is very early on in the comics, right? So, you know, throughout the whole comic books and, you know, like throughout the whole, like, you know, run of the comics, Rick Grimes doesn't have a hand, of course. And, you know, he actually starts looking more like Aaron. So, you know, they actually gave that look to Aaron later on. But, you know, it's actually much cooler seeing, like, you know, Rick without a hand, but doing the stuff that he does, right? Even without one hand, he's like a force to be reckoned with. But in my opinion, you know, it's actually a good thing that they didn't go with the storyline in the show, right? You know, I did hear that they wanted to go with it, right? They were actually about to make Rick lose his hand. And also, you do see in the show multiple times that Rick is actually about to lose his hand. You know, he's about to get bit, or, you know, something is happening. But, you know, like, it's always a fake out or something like that. And even, like, you know, when Negan was actually threatening, like, you know, to cut off Carl's hand, you know, like in the episode where Negan actually does appear, like season 7 episode 1, right, where Glenn and Abraham die, everyone thought that Rick was going to get his own hand cut off. But, you know, a fun fact is actually that Daryl was supposed to get his hand cut off in that episode when he actually punched Negan, like after he killed Abraham. But, you know, again, they didn't go with that. But yeah, you know, back to Rick, you know, it's a good thing that they didn't go with that, right? Because it actually it shows a difference between the comics and the show, right? And that's a huge drastic difference, right? And, you know, I guess I could applaud them for not taking that choice and, you know, to go in this more unique direction and, you know, to make Rick Grimes' story work even with both hands, right? And, you know, again, that may not seem that significant, but Rick Grimes not having a hand, you know, if you read the comics, like, it's actually insane seeing the stuff that he does without one hand. And now the fourth difference I want to talk about is Carl's ending in the comics. And, you know, in the show, Carl's ending is that he dies, right, in season 8, right? He dies in season 8, and it was very unexpected death, right? Everybody thought that, you know, Carl was gonna live on because of the comics, but in the comics, like, you know, Carl does live on, right? He basically, like, you know, outlives everyone, right? He has a daughter with Sophia, and, you know, they, like, you know, he's like telling her the story of Rick Grimes and, you know, their whole journey throughout the apocalypse. And basically Carl is one of the last people standing, and, you know, of course they do a time jump in the Commonwealth, and then, you know, they show that, you know, there are less walkers, and, you know, they're thriving, and humanity is actually, like, you know, ahead, and you know, the communities are just getting better, the Commonwealth is getting better, and it's actually going back to the old world. And in my opinion, it was actually a really bad decision that they killed off Carl in the show, right? I mean, Carl was such an amazing character, right? And, you know, it did look like that they did set up his story to, like, you know, for him to actually survive for longer, all the way up until the end. But as we all know, you know, AMC did not want to pay Chandler Riggs for, like, you know, like an adult contract, right? I mean, from season 1 all the way up to season 8, he was actually in a child contract, right? He wasn't a full adult. But, you know, by the time that season 8 rolled around, you know, they didn't want to change his contract. They didn't want to pay him more. So then, you know, they ended up killing off his character, and, you know, in my opinion, that was, like, one of the most stupid reasons to even kill him off, right? Because Carl was such a lovable character, and also, like, in season 8, he was actually starting to become a better character. But, you know, again, like, he died. So, like, you know, I wish that we kind of got this comic ending, but, you know, again, we would have actually not gotten this ending because of, like, you know, the spin-offs that they want to, like, you know, come out with and all of that. But I think that it would have been an interesting story if Carl actually sticked around and he actually became the lead after Rick left the show, right, after he was taken by the CRM, and, you know, just seeing Carl all grown up, and, you know, him, like, leading the group. And I think that role was actually given to Daryl in the show. And now the last major difference I wanted to talk about is that in the comics of The Walking Dead, Rick Grimes actually dies, and in fact he actually does stick around, like, you know, during the Whisperer arc and also during the Commonwealth arc. And, you know, that doesn't happen in the show because in the comics the CRM are not even a thing, right? It's a totally original idea for the show. And, you know, because the actor of Rick, Andrew Lincoln, wanted to, like, you know, take a break from the character in the show, so, you know, they just ended up not killing him, but, you know, keeping an open slate for him to actually return. And, you know, they ended up doing that. He's getting his own spin-off. But in the comics, Rick actually does end up dying in the Commonwealth arc, and, you know, he's killed by Sebastian while he was actually asleep after he gave his whole speech. And in the show, they actually gave that speech to Daryl, but, you know, Daryl didn't end up dying because he's having his own spin-off, and, you know, they already announced it beforehand. I mean, it would have been more impactful if Daryl gave that speech without us knowing about the spin-offs. But, yeah, you know, as you can see, like, you know, I actually mentioned this in the start of my video that they gave a lot of these roles to Daryl as well, like, you know, Carl's role, Abraham's role, Tyrese's role, even Rick's role. They gave all those roles to Daryl from, like, you know, from the comics. In the show, like, Daryl got those roles. And, you know, it's really interesting that, you know, Daryl became from a character in season 1 that was supposed to die in season 1, and he became the main character, ending off the main speech for the show during the Commonwealth arc. And now that's it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and please comment down if you guys want a part 2 to this video, because, like, you know, there are so many differences between the Walking Dead show and the comics. Like, you know, I could just sit here all day and just point them out, but these are just like 5 differences that, like, you know, are pretty significant at the same time. And yeah, you know, it's so much fun to actually compare the comics and the show, because the like, you know, the differences are really big. And also there are a lot of moments in the show which are panel for panel from the comics. So, you know, it's actually pretty cool to see that they implemented the comics very well, but at the same time they added like a lot of changes. And now, other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you guys so much, right, you know, for the growth and the support, right? And we have a goal in mind for 5,000 subscribers. So if you guys want to be part of this goal to 5,000 subscribers, please subscribe. And now, other than that, thank you all so much for watching.